Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Namaste. I am Dr. Sujatha Mohan, senior disciple of Padma Bhushan, Dr. Padma Subramaniam. Being in this field for nearly 40 years, learning Bharat and Nrityam under my guru, and also in the field of academics, teaching Bharatanatyam, Natyasastra, theory and history for the students of bachelor's and master's of performing arts and Bharatanatyam. I would like to start my course. The course named Introduction to Natyasastra, the Techniques of Indian Theatre Art. What is Natyasastra? What is Natya? Natya is a composite art which combines music, dance and drama. So, holistic art of theatre conceived by Bharata. The Shastra, the technique of Natya, is given by Bharata in the text called Natyasastra, written by him, which comprises of nearly 36 chapters. So, a holistic term, Natya, holistic art, not only music, dance and drama, also comprises of the arts such as sculptures, architecture, literature, how to write a drama, how to pen a drama, how to introduce music to that drama, and how to perform that. And we have the sources from the temple sculptures of dance and drama elements, especially in India and especially in Tamil Nadu. If we see, there are many temples which source that this Shastra was prevailing as a performance in the early centuries. So, let us come back to Natya, the holistic form, which was conceived by Brahma and was later added, Nritta was added by Shiva and the Vrittis by Vishnu, and was handed over to Bharata. And Bharata's work, which is a technical written theory, which is known as Natyasastra. So, before moving to the 36 chapters of Natyasastra, let us see how this text prevailed. Of course, we all know all these texts were written in manuscripts and was saved or was preserved by scholars in the earlier days in their own personal libraries. So, it was not brought into public, it was not known, or it was not to be accessed by everyone. So the scholars had their own working, and they have worked on each and every aspect of these texts. So now this text, coming to the date of this texts, we have so many scholars and their own opinion telling about the date of this Natyasastra. Let us see. What is Natya? There are two terms, Kavya and Natya. In a general sense, Natya was to be known as a Drishya Kavya. So, the two terms Shravya Kavya and Drishya Kavya were that which was heard, and of course in the Drishya Kavya both it is audible and visible. So this term Natya as a Drishya Kavya has been an art of storytelling for so many centuries. This is what Bharata says, and this art still prevails. There are many developments in this art. There are many storytelling art forms which have sprung out of this Natya. And this art form is not only the storytelling element, enacting element has also added the enacting element, and that is how we have the body movements, the voice, the facial expressions, the moving of the gaits, etc., and which also finally evokes rasa in the audience. And of course, this is everything is got through the concentration of the mind of the actor, and of course the audience also. Now this is enhanced by the costumes, the makeups, stage props, etc., and of course the instrumental music, and this has been given to us through the sculptures, paintings, beautiful paintings which give beauty and highlight the idea of the actor into the painting. Like facial expression is seen in painting, the body movements are seen in painting, and even the sculptures, if you take, they are not static sculptures, they are dynamic sculptures, and also in some sculptures we see the beautiful eye movements and even the facial expressions which are to be noted. So in Natya, of course after Natyasastra we had the Sanskrit theatre. There are many scholars who have discussed about the Sanskrit theatre which has come to us till now, and even now it is a performing art form. Sanskrit theatre is performed all over India, and this Natya is thus created by a poet, Anukirtana, presented by the actors, represented by the actors, Anukarana, and visualized by the audience, Anubhavana. And this a fusion of all these is a Natya. Historians have spoken about this Natya, and many scholars, especially not only Indian scholars, Greek scholars, foreign scholars, American scholars have not only researched on Natya, they have brought out the Natyasastra text itself only after their research. So how did the text exist? How did it come? Was it there for all the centuries? No. Looking at some of the references in the temple sculptures in around 13th, 14th centuries, we see some of the sculptures which talk about Natyasastra and dance. Even in the Chidambaram temple sculpture, we see the shloka of Natyasastra engraved on top of the Karana. But after 15th century, was it prevailing? Was the text available? How it was brought back for us to read as a published version? So let us see how it was discovered, because it was lost during maybe after around 14th, 15th centuries. It was lost and it was regained only after 18th century or 19th century. Now let us see about that. Before moving on to the discovery of Natyasastra, let us see about the author and the date of Natyasastra. Author of Natyasastra is known to us, the revered Bharata Muni. So he is a Muni, a sage, who is a seer, and he has composed this work in 36 chapters. There are scholars discussing about, is it Bharata a pen name of a person? Can he work on all the 36 chapters? Is it possible to give a voluminous text like this by a sage? But now, Bharata or Bharatas, is it a pen name? Because the term Bharata is still even referred to for an actor. Bharata as an actor. So, is it the group of actors or group of men, like we have the Vyasa for Mahabharata? Is it Bharata who wrote, the group of persons who compiled this text? But when we look into the text, there is a beautiful coordination, and also there is a connection between each and every chapters. So, one chapter leads to the another chapter, and if you check the chapters which are connected with each other, it's mind-boggling. So, unless and otherwise it is a single person, we cannot have this connectivity between the chapters. So, scholars like Dr. Padma Subramaniam says that it must be a single authored book, single author Bharata Muni. Of course, there are so many authors who are really knowledgeable, and especially the Muni, Bharata Muni, who's a scholar in not only this art form, he has given almost all that is connected with Natya, as I told you earlier. So that is how they take that the author of Natyasastra is Bharata Muni. So, it is again, of course, given in the first chapter when we move on, that he says, I am going to present this Natyasastra in front of you. So, naturally, he has written the work. And of course, the last chapter also says that Bharata, as Bharata, I am transmitting this work, this art form to the generation. And that is how we can take that Bharata could have been the author. But earlier to Bharata, we have during the Panini's period, that is earlier. So, what is the date of Bharata? Now, let us move on to the date of Bharata. As we have the sutras, Natyasastra given by Shilalin and Krishashva, there are ample Natyasasutras referred by Panini, given by Panini BCE, around 4th century BCE, 5th century, 4th century BCE. So at that time he does not talk about Natyasastra. So it must be later to Panini's work. So many scholars fix a date of 2nd century BCE to 2nd century CE is given. But some scholars have also given the date as even prior to this, as 5th century BCE also. But we don't have a proper evidence for this particular author, as he has only given as Bharata, but not in any place he has mentioned about his ancestors or about his date. But coming to the Natyasasutras, which were early, and also there is a mention in the Namalinganushasana, that is the Amarakosha of Amarasimha, refers to the actors, the Natas. There is a Natya Varga. Amarakosha refers to Nartaki, Lasika, Brukumsa, etc. And the Rigveda, of course. In the Vedas, the Shatapatha Brahmana, the Aitreya Brahmana, and the Yajnavalkya Smriti uses the term Bharata in the sense of Nata and is often referred to as Nartaka, Bharata, Kushilava, Shailusha, Suta, etc. So these are all the terms which were prior to Bharata's Natyasastra. We also have a reference to Adi Bharata. So as this Bharata's Natyasastra, what we are studying now, we have as a publication, is in Sanskrit, and it has 6,000 verses. Shat Sahasri. There seems to be an older version, Dvadasha Sahasri, with 12,000 verses, and also penned by Adi Bharata, they say. But we have not got any proof for that, and we don't have all the shlokas also. But there is a reference in some of the texts quoting Adi Bharata as given by him about Natya. So thus we have earlier references for Bharata's Natyasastra even before Bharata, and some scholars say that this Dvadasha Sahasra was prior to this Shat Sahasra, that is the 6,000 verses of this Bharata. So that is how the scholars such as N.P. Unni, who has published a work on Natyasastra says there are some references to Vriddha Bharata or Bharata Vriddha, who wrote, that is the Adi Bharata, who wrote this 12,000 granthas, while Bharata produced the Natyasastra in 6,000 shlokas. He quotes M. Ramakrishna Kavi's version. And even the Sharada Tanaya in his Bhava Prakashana states that Bharata's made up of two epitomes, the Natya Veda containing 12,000 verses and the Natya Shastra containing 6,000 verses. So before going to the origin, we all know that this Natya Shastra originated from the four Vedas, and this is considered as a fifth Veda, Panchamam Vedam. Panchama Veda. And coming back to the date, almost accepted by many of the scholars, 2nd century BCE to 2nd century CE. And of course, as I told you, there are scholars who say that there is one Bharata and there are many Bharatas. The names vary. So now, how did they discover this text? Where from they discovered the text? This discovery was earlier or later. So let us see in which century we got this text. And before moving on, regarding the date of Natyasastra, Dr. N.P. Unni has given various views on this. He says Mohan Ghosh, who has also compiled and translated the Natyasastra, who was one of the foremost person who had brought out the set of 2 volumes of Natyasastra. On the basis of his study of the linguistic material and the ethnological, mythological and geographical data, dates as early as 500 BC. That is, as I told you, it is nearing the 5th century BCE. Then the Panini, based on the Panini's Natyasutras, Regnault holds the date as 4th century BCE. And then we have other scholars, Hariprasad Shastri, who fixed the date for 2nd century BCE. And of course, Professor Levy on the later 300 CE, and P.V. Kane almost to the 3rd century CE, and A.B. Keith also to 3rd century CE. Of course, my guru Dr. Padma Subramaniam says that there is a chance of the author Bharata, who has not even mentioned Rama or Krishna in his text of Natyasastra. So, as we all know, it was during the Treta Yuga the text was conceived. And the same time, Valmiki was one of the students of Bharata. This is interesting to know. Even in the first chapter it's mentioned, and even the last chapter it is mentioned that Valmiki was one of the disciples of Bharata. So, according to Dr. Padma, she says, it must be Valmiki should have written the Ramayana even after this Natyasastra. Because Natyasastra was conceived at that time and he was a student of Natya. And after he witnessed the life of Rama, he penned the story of Rama, Ramayana, with the base of this Natya. At least after conceiving the Natya, after having conceived this Natya. So that is how there are many scholars who even give an earlier date for this Natyasastra. But as I told you, this Natyasastra, which has been prevailing, especially not only in Kashmir, because we know Bharata is from Kashmir. Not only in Kashmir, even it has reached South India, and the verses of Natyasastra are clearly seen in the inscriptions of the temples down south. Now, where it was lost, how it was lost? Maybe during the Mughal period, because we lost all the temples. We lost many of the sculptures, even the temple worship, many icons. Maybe during that time, a lot of literature was also lost. And as I told you, these were all in the personal libraries of these scholars. So, this text was rediscovered and published in later 19th century. Let us see how it was discovered and the story behind it. So, we all know that many of the Greek, German scholars who came to India and the travelers who were in India, who were very much attracted to the Sanskrit works. The Sanskrit was a main language throughout India, especially in the northern countries. So now, the discovery of this Sanskrit theatre was by Sir William Jones. He came to India and he was more attracted towards this texts of Kalidasa, the dramas of Kalidasa, especially Shakuntalam. So, with the publication of English translation of Shakuntalam in around 1789, that's what the scholars say. The scholars like N.P. Unni has given a beautiful, detailed notes on how this Natyasastra was discovered. After that, a German translation happened, and this attracted the Western scholars for the field of drama, especially for studying about the field of drama, theatre. Following the footsteps of Sir William Jones, then H. H. Wilson, he also published certain specimens of this theatre art, especially this art of Natya. He could not succeed in finding out the manuscripts of Natyasastra. Later, there were many libraries in Kerala, especially the manuscripts were in the personal libraries of the scholars. There were even the copies of the commentaries. Natyasastra, Bharata's Natyasastra had many commentaries written, but the commentary which we get now is the commentary of Abhinava Gupta, which is very popular and which is one of the important essential commentaries. This commentary is known as Abhinava Bharati. So now, this palm leaves manuscripts were under T. Ganapati Shastri of Kerala, and many of these manuscripts were written in Malayalam, which was a vernacular language. Then a few were translated, and the first publication of a part of Natyasastra appeared in 1865 as an appendix to the Dasharupaka of Dhananjaya. It is a later 10th century text, Dasharupaka of Dhananjaya. So there was an appendix to this text which talked about Natyasastra, because one of the important chapters of Natyasastra is Dasharupaka Vidhanam. After it was published in the appendix of Dasharupaka, then editor Edward Hall had appended 18th to 20th chapter and the 34th chapter of Natyasastra. As the rest of the manuscripts were corrupt, he could not continue with that, and it was just left like that. So this was the first attempt to print or publish a part of Natyasastra. Then the second attempt was done by Paul Regnaud. He was a French scholar. This was around in 1880. He was attracted by the study of Natyasastra. On Natyasastra, study was prepared by a German scholar named Heyman. So this is also given by Mohan Ghosh in his version. And Regnaud brought out a critical edition of 2 chapters of Natyasastra, especially the 15th and 16th chapter of the Natyasastra, which was connected with Vachika Abhinaya. Later, another 2 chapters were added. The Rasa and Bhava chapter, that is the 6th chapter and the 7th chapter of Natyasastra, was also printed by Regnaud. This was also in around 1884. So earlier a part was published in the Sharupaka. Then later, second attempt, it was 2 other chapters of Vachika Binaya and the 2 chapters of Rasa and Bhava were published by Regnault, and it was the third attempt in publishing the Natyasastra was by Johnny Croce. He was another French scholar who was a disciple of Regnault. In 1888, he published the 28th chapter, which dealt with the theory of music. So that is how this came into publication. So these initial attempts of the foreign authors inspired the Indian scholars, Indian authors, and they wanted to bring out a complete edition of the Natyasastra, all the chapters. There were many scholars who worked on that. Pandit Shivadatta and Kashinath Panduranga Parab brought out a complete edition for the first time in 1894 from the Kavyamala series. But this was just based on 2 manuscripts and it was quite unsatisfactory, says Sri N.P. Unni in his book. Later, in this version was in Kavyamala series of Bombay. Later in 1943, he brought out a revised edition of the same series, and it was with making use of all printed editions available to him as well as some fresh manuscripts, which was revived till date. So by that time, the Kashi edition, the edition of Grosse and others had also appeared. So then, one more, this Kavyamala edition in 1898, 4 years after the first Kavyamala edition was issued, Grosse brought out the critical edition of the first 14 chapters of the text, from the beginning to the first 14 chapters. Then we have the scholars in 1927, the great scholars Balwant Upadhyaya and Bhatukanath Sharma brought out the complete edition, all 36 chapters. From the Kashi Saraswati Bhavan Library, Banaras, this was published by Chaukamba series, Chaukamba Sanskrit series. So now, moving on, as already noted, almost the complete revised edition was there in 1943, edited by Pandit Kedarnath, who was the son of Pandit Durga Prasad, and it incorporated all the readings of all available manuscripts till then. So, thus it made use of Grosse's edition of the first 14 chapters, Kashi Sanskrit series of 1927, then also the GOS Gaikwad Oriental series edition, first 2 of the 4 volumes that appeared till 1936, and the manuscripts from other collections. This Gaikwad Oriental series, one of the best earlier sources for this Natyasastra. Most important edition of this Natyasastra published from the Gaikwad Oriental series, Baroda, by Manavalli Ramakrishna Kavi. For the first time, the editor included the only commentary on the text called Natya Veda Vivritti, also called Abhinava Bharati, after the name of the commentator Abhinava Gupta. This, along with the commentary, this was published by Sri Manavalli Ramakrishna Kavi. It took almost 4 decades for him to complete the editing and printing. Still, it was an attempt, great attempt. So, volume 1 had chapter 1 to 7, and it was in 1926 when it was published. Volume 2 had 8 to 18 in 1934. Then volume 3 had chapters 19 to 27 in 1954, and volume 4 had chapter 28 to 37 in 1964. So, starting from 1926 to 1964, these were published, and he has worked on editing the manuscripts also, and along with Abhinava Bharati. So, this was one of the, to be noted, this Gaikwad Oriental series, one of the oldest versions of Natyasastra along with Abhinava Bharati, and one of the complete versions of Natyasastra. So, some scholars say that T. Ganapati Shastri had himself an idea of bringing out this Abhinava Bharati along with the Natyasastra through the Trivandrum Sanskrit series. He had actually edited some portions and brought out in print the first 8 pages of Abhinava Bharati. But he could not continue that, and before continuing that, as he could not continue, he gave the whole manuscripts to Manavalli Ramakrishna Kavi, who had undertaken this project. So, he had lent the manuscripts because they had printed 8 pages before the GOS edition appeared in 1926. And then the editor, it was a sad loss because of the editor was not there, and in which Ganapati Shastri also died the year 1926. So, that the whole text was, the manuscripts were given to Manavalli Ramakrishna Kavi in order to bring out the GOS edition, Gaikwad Oriental series. So, still the first 8 pages printed in Trivandrum is in a new bound copy in the Kerala University Oriental Research Library, Manuscripts Library, and from this we can know that Abhinava Gupta's first Abhinava Bharati, along with the manuscripts of Natyasastra and Abhinava Bharati, was first started. The work was started by T. Ganapati Shastri, and later it was lent to Manavalli Ramakrishna Kavi, and thus they brought out the full version of Natyasastra, all the 4 volumes, with Sanskrit and with Abhinava Bharati. There was not a translation in that publication. Since we understand from this that Ganapati Shastri was the first sincere editor of this Abhinava Bharati which we are having today. It is from his hands that we have retrieved the Abhinava Bharati, which is a wonderful commentary on Natyasastra, without which it's very difficult to understand the Shastra, especially the dance for dancers and the theatre persons. Without the commentary, it's very difficult to reconstruct the dance and music parts of Natyasastra. And here I would like to convey my pranams to my Guru, Dr. Padma Subramaniam, who has reconstructed the whole elements of dance, especially the Karanas, from the 4th chapter of Natyasastra, and has revived the performance of the dance elements of Natyasastra and brought it to the present 20th century world of dancers. Because now it is performed. It is a part of almost all the classical forms of India. Name it Bharatanatyam, Mohiniyattam, or Odissi, or Kathak, Kuchipudi. If you see, there are many movements which are seen in Natyasastra. And not only the classical forms, also the theatre forms. Unless and otherwise we have the commentary of Abhinava Bharati, we could not have had the Rupakas, Uparupakas and all other forms of dance and drama prevailing. Now, we could not have understood all these elements of Natya. Thank you. Namaste.